Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of December. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with the Kupiansk-Lyman front line from this area. As you can see, there are not much icons in this area. The Russians reported that during the day they made massive artillery attack of Ukrainian positions in the town by the name of Petropavlovka. They were targeting the 14th Mechanized Brigade, and a little bit to the south, the Russians were attacking the town by the name of Kruglyakivka, this one. And in this town, the Russians were attacking 92nd Mechanized Brigade. As you can see, the Russians are moving their focus. Recently, they were attacking the Ukrainians in the area of Kotlarovka, Kislovka, Ivanovka, Nivolskaya, and every single time they move their focus a little bit more and more to the west. And by this, they're trying to press and to push the Ukrainians to the Oskol River. So I believe that Ukrainians are losing their initiative in this area. Furthermore, I believe that they have already lost the initiative. And now, maybe these days, the Russians will make another attempt of offensive push in this area because they see that the Ukrainians are not able to do anything, at least on the north side, on the North Kupiansk front line. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainian lost around 60 soldiers and something around 5 armored vehicles on the north or Kupiansk front line. Furthermore, as a result of effective counter artillery duel, the Ukrainian lost one howitzer in the town by the name of Berestova. This town is located on the north front line. And so, as you can see, the Russians continue pushing in the Ukrainians in this is Berestova. In this area, the Ukraine lost another howitzer. If we are talking about Lyman front line, the Ukrainians, as we discussed, they are ready to start storming of Crimea, but they're not doing this. Maybe they try to accumulate forces. Maybe they try to make some kind of regrouping in this area. But the Russians, they're not wasting their time. They attacked the Ukrainians in the town by the name of Yampolovka. They were aiming at the 110th Defense Brigade, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukraine lost around 40 soldiers and something around 9 armored vehicles. Now we're moving to the south, and in the area of Bakhmut, as you can see, there are a lot of icons, the same icons with the soldier under the Russian flag, and all these things means that the Russians have some progress and development on near Bakhmut and inside Bakhmut as well. The Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainian lost around 50 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. The Russians were attacking and bombing or attacking from tanks the Ukrainians' 25th Air Mobile Brigade that located in Krasnaya Gora. So as you can see, the Russians got very close to this town, and we can say that, by the way, this is the first time the Russians reported and included this town, Krasnaya Gora, in their report. So that means that the battle for Krasnaya Gora has started. This is a very important town. We will discuss this town a little bit later. And another update, the Russians attacked the Ukrainians in the town by the name of Klishevka. The Russians, they're trying to storm this area, and they were attacking the 16th Mechanized Brigade. And I'll repeat one more time that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukraine lost around 50 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles in this area. Now let's discuss the progress in this area, because as you can see, there are progress in the south from Klishevka. There is a progress between Klishevka and Bakhmut. There is an icon showing that this forest was taken by the Russians, and as you can see, the Russians have moved their gray line in this area, showing that this is now in the gray zone and the forest is under their real control. Furthermore, the Russians reported that they managed to establish entire final control over the rockade that connects Bakhmutskaya and Bakhmut. And furthermore, there is another update, another progress near this forest in direction of Solidar. And also the Russians are saying that they managed to destroy or completely reduce till zero the Ukrainian commandos near Yakovlivka. So now let's discuss and let's try to understand the situation near Bakhmut. According to the Russian sources, of course, the Ukrainian sources and the Western sources shows completely different picture. But at this stage of this special operation, I believe the Russians, because they're advancing, they're in offensive state, And of course, if they achieve some progress, they try to show, to give us updates. And if we're talking about the Ukrainians, they're in defense state. Of course, we understand that they don't want to lose territories, they don't want to lose town. And of course, it's very difficult to give such information to the people, to the nation, to the soldiers, that they're losing their position. So that's why they try to give such updates, not at the same time they receive these updates, like losing this or that positions. So let's update this map. First of all, about the south of Klishchiivka. Klishchiivka still remains under Ukrainian control, but the south part, and I believe that this territory is under Russian control. Now let's move to the Ivangrad. The Russians, as you can see, according to the Russian sources map, the Russians established control over Ivangrad even maybe months ago. So, but the Western source map doesn't want to update itself. So let's update Ivangrad according to information we have. So this block is also under Russian control. Now let's update the territory on the east side of Bakhmut. According to the Russian sources, they established control over something like this, over these streets, and I believe that this is the real situation according to the Russian sources. Today we got update that the Russians established control over this forest. Now let's update this forest, and there is an area, this area is in the gray zone, but I will not mark this gray zone as the Russian territory under control, because it will be like a real speculation, let's say. So let's update the forest. So the Russians are saying that they control the forest. Nice. And now let's update Bakhmutska, because it's very important. The Russians, a few days ago, they established control over this school in the middle part, and after that they were trying to advance in the direction of railroad station Dikonska. So I believe that the Russians control this entire road rocket, and at least I'm 400% sure that the Russians are there. And now let's update Yakovlevka, Berestova, Belogorovka. The Russians established control for Belogorovka many days ago. Yakovlevka was taken something around 2 or 3 weeks ago. And this is the update territory that is under Russian control by today. So as you can see, not much changes, but anyway, these territories are very important. I haven't added one update. Because this is the most important update about Bakhmut, and now let's discuss this. As you can see, the Western source map shows at least two interesting icons. The first one is near Klishchiivka, and the second one very far from Klishchiivka and very far from the Russian position. As you can see, a small AK-47 in red circle right in front of railroad rocket and very far from the Russian position. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over the south part of Bakhmut, so they control something like this. And furthermore, today we got another update from the Russian sources. As you can see, there is an arrow showing this, that the Russians managed to advance in direction of Ivanovska. I believe that this arrow is very added to this map softly. I believe that it's highly unlikely that the Russians attacks in direction of Ivanovska, because it's like the useless waste of time. If you have control of the south part of Bakhmut, I believe that the Russians were attacking in direction of this N32 road, of this cross, and some sources were saying that the Russians were pretty successful and that they managed to establish control over maybe the forest or something like this. So from this picture, I understand that the main goal that the Russians want to achieve in this operation is to establish control over this cross, over the entrance inside of Bakhmut. So this is the most important part. It's highly unlikely the Russians are able to take Ivanovska, because this area is very far from the Russian source, from the Russian army, and furthermore you need to cross fields. But if we're talking about this part, the Russians have already entered the south part, so along the streets, along these roads, I believe that it's much more easier to take control over this part. But before the Russians can do this, of course, first of all, they need to complete the mission with Klishchiivka, and From this perspective, we see that from one side, the Russians establish fire control over the roads by taking under control of this part of Rakit. The Russians establish fire control over supply and support roads that goes from Ivanovsk in direction of Klishevka. By taking this side of this bridgehead, the Russians cut supply road with Bakhmut itself. So I believe that now there is a real lack of manpower, ammo, and shells in Klishevka. And I don't think that Ukrainians will try to hold this area for many days. I believe that in a week, maybe after New Year, the Ukrainians will be forced to step back from Klishevka. And if we're talking about the Russians, if they want to develop their offensive operation to the north inside of Bakhmut, of course, first of all, they need to secure and to make safe position on their flanks. So Klishevka is a real target these days. Anyway, they need to take this town. Furthermore, if we take Klishevka is completely encircled with a very powerful system of trenches that the Russians will use during the next or further offensive operation in direction of the north. They will keep some forces in these trenches and they will just do one thing: secure the Russians while the main forces will continue storming the central part of Bakhmut. And I'll remind you one more time that mainly, if we're talking about the Russians, the Wagners are storming, and mainly it's ex-prisoners who storm this town. If we're talking about the Ukrainians, they're using a lot of forces from the regular army, and of course the losses from the Ukrainian side are much higher in this situation in comparison with the Russians. And so if the Russians are able to take Klishevka, then they will be able to continue their offensive operation in the south. But not everything is not so easy and not so beautiful as we see according to this map, because there is one important fortification, one important area that stands right in front of the Russians, and I believe that it's highly unlikely that the Russians are able to take this area. They are able to get as close as possible. They are able to cut supply roads from N32 road and furthermore, but after that they won't be able to go further, and I'll explain to you why. And now I'm going to talk with you about this Yubileyная block. This is Yubileyная Street, and as you can see, this is some kind of like a block, and there is a road. It's very like a perfect square, and as you can see, this area is a real it's the toughest fortification that stands on the Russian side, and this is one of the most important area in Bakhmut, and it's like a small Ugledar inside of the town. Let's return back to the Russian sources map, and I'm talking about this area. As you can see, there are a lot of like village territory around this block. There are small buildings, private houses, and so on, and then we see like a small heart. It's like heart of Bakhmut, I believe, and as you can see, there are a lot of high buildings, and like 9 floors. It's the highest place in this town. And of course, the Ukrainians have already turned this territory into real fortification, and I believe that for now, at this stage of storming, the Russians are not able to take this area. It's like small Ugledar, and it's like the highest place in this town. There are a lot of buildings. They are very close to each other. There are a lot of forests, as you can see. There are a lot of positions and places where the Ukrainians can hide artillery, tanks, armored vehicles. There are a lot of places to deploy their infantry. And this is some kind of gate. This is some kind of key to the eastern part of Bakhmut. And from this perspective, even if the Russians are able to take, let's say, cross this one area, and I believe that they are able to take this area, they won't be able to make any progress from this point, because they will be stopped by the Ukrainians from this, let's say, small fortification. So anyway, even if the Russians continue their offensive operation in the south and achieve success by taking Klishevka and so on, they won't be able to proceed. They won't be able to take control, let's say, over the north part of Bakhmut. And even if the Russians cut the N32 road, there is still one safe road, and this is the road I'm talking about. The Ukrainians still have possibilities to support the Ukrainians with this road. There are a lot of local roads furthermore, and as you can see, this road is completely protected by these fortifications that located on the west side of Bakhmut. So anyway, there are still a lot of job to do, and this is the reason. But it doesn't mean that the Russians don't need to develop progress. Of course they need, because they need to develop progress from the south just to reduce supply support, just to increase the loss from the Ukrainian side, and to make their life much more difficult than they have right now. And this is the reason why the offensive operation in the area of Krasnogora and Podgorodny becomes vital for the Russians, because this is the only thing that they are able to achieve from the south, and now they need to have some progress from the north. And this is the reason I focused your attention on the town by the name of Krasnogora, this one, because today we got the first update of the fact that the Russians started battle for this town. They were attacking this town from the north. As soon as the Russians established control over the central part of Bakhmutska, they secured their flanks from the north. The Russians got established a lot of control over a lot of checkpoints near Podgorodne. So now they're completely secure to attack Krasnogora between these two areas, and they're doing this, and I believe that they're pretty successful in this, because there are not much way how to support Krasnogora. This town, all these bridges are destroyed, and there is a railroad blockade that is completely under Russian artillery focus, and artillery fire. And furthermore, the Russians storm Podgorodnya these days. So the Russians need to complete this mission, and after that, I believe they will be able to achieve the maximum result they are able to achieve on this front line. To tell the truth, I'm not sure that it's an easy job to cross this railroad blockade. As you can see, there are a lot of railroads in this area. It's a very big distance to cross. Furthermore, you won't be able to use armored vehicle tanks to cross these railroad blockades. Or you will be able, but you will be forced to spend a lot of time for this. And of course, every single second cost lives in this battle. And if you stuck at some place for more than 1 minute, maybe the Ukrainians will be able to shut down you by the artillery or tanks. So this is the reason why crossing this railroad blockade, I believe this is not the main goal. But anyway, even though the Russians need to get as much as possible, as close as possible to this railroad blockade to secure the flanks, and maybe at some point they will be able to cross these railroads, and maybe they will be able to start development on the north. But I don't think that this is a very soon operation that we will see. Maybe we won't be able to see this even, maybe by the end of January we will be able to see something like this. So as you can see, Bakhmut is not an easy situation. Furthermore, even if the Russians are able to, let's say, to cross this railroad blockade, and if they decide to attack the Bakhmut then from the north, anyway, the thing that they will face is first is road blockade, MO3, this one, and after that they will be forced to cross another railroad blockade that connects Chasov Yar and Bakhmut. So the more the Russians progress in this area, the more difficulties they will see, and something like this. So the battle for Bakhmut, I'm sure that anyway the battle for Bakhmut will be finished in the Russian favor. Anyway, they have already calculated everything. They know the real picture. But the question is about the price that the Russians are going to pay. And this is the reason I remind you one more time that the Russians uses the ex-prisoners in this front line. So maybe this is the reason why they're so sure in their operation, in the effectiveness of their operation, and in the result of this operation. So that's it about Bakhmut. Furthermore, don't forget that the Russians these days try to develop offensive operation in the direction of Razdolovka, and of course Solidar anyway sooner or later will fall. But if we're talking about the Ukrainians, we can say that they managed to achieve a local victory, small local victory, and I'm talking about the fact that they managed to hold Bakhmut by the end of this year. Of course, it's not like the end of the year. We still have at least 24 hours or even more, but anyway, we can say that this is a progress. And if you remember, a few days ago we discussed that after the new year comes, maybe the Ukrainians will make a decision to step back from Bakhmut, and anyway they will do this decision as soon as they see the real risks to being encircled, they will step back from Bakhmut immediately. Now let's move to the south, and we are going to Donetsk area. As you can see, Donetsk, there are a lot of icons, but as you can see, the Ukrainians attacks the edge of this town with artillery, and they were a lot of episodes of artillery duels, and the Russians reported that they destroyed some artillery towns in Krasnogorovka. As you can see, during the previous week, we discussed a lot about artillery duels, and as you can see, the Russians almost every single day they include the numbers about the destroyed artillery system from Krasnogorovka. So you understand that Krasnogorovka is I don't know, it's like epicenter, is the center of Ukrainian artillery concentration, because from this town it's very nice to attack Donetsk. This town is very close. There are a lot of buildings, a lot of places where the Ukrainians are able to hide artillery. There is an industrial zone, so it's the best area to attack the Russians. So the Russians knows where exactly the Ukrainians hide their artillery, so they try to reduce. And today the Ukrainian lost at least in this area one howitzer Gvozdika. Now we're moving to the south of the Donetsk front line. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost around 70 soldiers, something around 11 armored vehicles in this area. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainians in Novomykhailovka on these positions, and they were attacking the Ukrainians in Prichistovka. In Novomykhailovka, 72nd Mechanized Brigade was attacked by the Russians, and if we're talking about Prichistovka, 108th Territory Defense Brigade was attacked. As you can see, the front line is stable in this area. Even we stopped receiving any information from Mariinka. There are no progress, I believe, in this area, or at least the Russians, maybe they face the wall or some barrier from Ukrainian side that they need to spend time to cross this barrier or something like this. More updates and very interesting updates are coming from Zaporozhye front line. Very interesting updates are coming from this area, and the Russian sources confirms and the Ukrainians confirms that we during the previous months we expected that the Ukrainians is the party that were going to start offensive operation in Zaporozhye in direction of Tokmak. But during the previous days we start receiving updates that the Russians have activated on this front line, and they're doing something here. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians made a small offensive operation in direction of Gulay-Pole. They managed to attack the Ukrainians, to penetrate defense orders, and they forced them to step back. We don't see any updates on this map. I don't know why, but a lot of Russian military experts provides information from this area, and they provides about some progress from the Russian side. And this is not the most important. The most important thing is that the Russians deployed another PMC on this front line. We know that there are a lot of PMC, of course. One of the biggest PMC on this conflict is the Wagner PMC, and their main field of their activity is Bakhmut. And during this week, at least I received very interesting update that the Russians deployed another PMC in the Zaporozhye area by the name of Patriot, PMC Patriot. And there was an interesting note about this PMC. Some sources were saying that this PMC belongs to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu. Not, of course, not directly. I believe that according to some local laws, he are not able to hold the private PMC. But I believe that through some companies or some people like Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, he controls, or at least he is the main I don't know, receiver of some nice things from this PMC. And this is very important because I believe that attack in direction of Gulay-Pole, that attack that haven't received any updates on this map, was done by that PMC. It was just, of course, Reko and combo, but from the other side, I believe that the Russians were testing this PMC as a main attack feast. They were trying to understand how the forces works together, if they're connected together, if they're able to follow orders or something like this. But furthermore, if we're talking about the Ukrainian sources, these days they talk a lot about the battle for Bakhmut, but a lot of very famous Ukrainian or Western military experts are saying that they expect another offensive operation from the Russian side, but also they're saying that the Ukrainians don't know exactly where the Russians are planning to attack, because there are a lot of places to attack in Zaporozhye, and we saw during these days some actions in this area. There may be attack from the border of Belarus. There might be attack somewhere in Kupiansk. A lot of area to attack, and the Ukrainians don't know exactly what the Russians are planning to do. And meanwhile, the Russians pushes in direction of Bakhmut, and they force the Ukrainians to send more and more reserves in this direction. So I believe maybe this January, maybe Bakhmut is not the only battle we're going to see this January. I believe that maybe this January and February or beginning of February, we're going to see another opening of another front line and activation of another front line. And of course, Zaporozhye is a very nice solution for this. Of course, Sumy, Chernigov is a very nice solution for this. So I believe that we might see something very interesting even these days. Furthermore, the Russians continue attacking Ukraine with missiles and Shahid drones. And the Russians, they have a real tactic of this. First, they attack with Shahid drones, trying to if the drones are able to reach their targets, it's very nice because they're able to destroy or energy facility or some industrial object or some accumulation of Ukrainian forces. And these attacks of cheap Shahid drones force the Ukrainians to use their real air defense systems to shut down the drones. And by that, the Russians are able to spot the Ukrainian air defense systems to fix or change or to set up their next upcoming attacks with the missiles, and after that they're sending missiles and destroy the Ukrainian air defense system. Furthermore, these days the Russians over-concentrated against the Ukrainian air defense system, and this might mean few things. First of all, of course, the Russians want to receive more accuracy from missiles, more effectiveness from missiles attacks, because we understand that a lot of missiles were shut down by the Ukrainians. But I believe that there is another reason why the Russians concentrated on the Ukrainian air defense system these days. And the thing is that the Russians or plans to use their marine operation, like the web paratroopers or something like this, or the Russians want to use their bombers, bomb carriers to bomb Ukraine with the real bombardments, but not with missiles, like FAB 1000, 5000, very powerful bombs, but not just rockets. So they want to use their air forces. But before this day, they couldn't do this because of air defense from Ukrainian side. But I believe that they want to open this gate. They want to open this field. They have a lot of airplanes. These days, the Russians are using just Su-25. It's very old planes. It's very old planes that were made in USSR. They want to use modern aircrafts with modern bombs, but for now they are not able to do this because of air defense. So we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you can condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your like, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.